Tom stood on the wooden porch of his farmhouse, watching the sky change colors in ways he'd never seen before. The weather radio inside had been crackling warnings all morning, but he'd ignored most of them. After 40 years of farming, he'd learned to read the land better than any machine. This time, though, something felt different. The air tasted like copper. The birds had stopped singing hours ago. The whole world seemed to be holding its breath. He checked the old radio again. The solar storm was accelerating. Scientists on the broadcast kept using words like unprecedented and catastrophic. Tom wasn't the type to panic. He'd weathered droughts, floods, and equipment failures that would have broken most people. But this felt bigger than anything he'd faced before. The sky wasn't just changing color, it was turning an angry shade of crimson, like someone had set fire to the clouds themselves. That's when he heard it. A sound like nothing he'd ever experienced. A deep, terrible screaming that seemed to come from the sky itself. Tom looked up and saw it immediately, a massive ship tearing through the atmosphere, its hull glowing red-hot. The engines were misfiring, sending cascades of sparks into the clouds. This wasn't a small transport or a civilian vessel. This was military. Whatever was happening, it was happening fast, and it was happening to his farm. The ship fought gravity for another few seconds before giving up. It descended in a controlled crash, which was the only reason it didn't tear a crater into the earth. Instead, it plowed across Tom's eastern pasture, tearing up years of careful farming, crushing fences, and finally coming to a smoking stop about 300 yards from his barn. Tom's first instinct was to call for help, but his phone had already lost signal. The electromagnetic storm was already affecting everything. He stood frozen on his porch, watching the smoking wreckage, trying to figure out what to do next. Then the hatch blew open. What emerged from that ship changed everything Tom thought he knew about the world. 13 figures stepped out, moving with a predatory grace that made his stomach tighten. They were tall, easily 7 feet each, covered in fur that ranged from silver to deep gray to midnight black. Their hands ended in claws that caught the strange light of the crimson sky. Their ears were pointed and alert. Their eyes, sharp and intelligent and dangerous, scanned the landscape with the precision of trained hunters. Tom had heard rumors about the wolfkin. Everyone had. You couldn't live in this world without hearing stories. Most of them were terrifying. Tales of warriors who served corporate interests, who hunted people for money, who asked questions after they'd already decided to kill. Tom had always assumed the stories were exaggerated, the way stories usually are. Watching 13 of them now, standing in his pasture with weapons visible and claws extended, he wasn't so sure. The lead figure was clearly in charge. She was scarred, deep marks running down one side of her face and across her arm. The scars didn't make her look weak. They made her look like someone who'd survived things that should have killed her and had come out the other side even more dangerous. Her eyes locked onto Tom's position immediately. This was the moment where everything could go wrong. Tom understood that with complete clarity. These were trained warriors. Their ship had crashed on his property. They were armed and probably frightened. Frightened beings with weapons were unpredictable beings. Tom made a choice. He stepped down from the porch slowly, deliberately keeping his hands visible and open. No sudden movements. No threatening gestures. Just an old farmer in work clothes walking toward 13 extremely dangerous aliens who just crashed into his farm. "Shelter's inside," he called out, his voice steady and calm. He pointed toward his farmhouse. "Power's probably out everywhere for miles because of the storm, but the house is sturdy. Roof won't leak. Got fresh water. You can wait it out." The scarred leader, Tom would later learn her name was Rachel, lowered her weapon slightly. It wasn't a full surrender, but it was something. Her eyes narrowed as she studied him. She was trying to figure out if this was a trap. Trying to understand why a human would offer help to wolfkin warriors, creatures that most humans feared and most governments had treaties against. Rachel had spent 20 years hunting criminals across 3 star systems. She'd learned that kindness was a weapon. That trust could be fatal. That most beings in the galaxy were looking for an angle, a way to gain advantage. But something about this human, his open hands, his steady voice, the way he wasn't radiating fear, seemed genuinely sincere. She nodded to her team and they began moving toward the farmhouse, their weapons still ready, their eyes still suspicious. But they were moving toward shelter instead of away from it. And somehow, that small choice would eventually save more than just lives. It would save the future. The farmhouse felt too small the moment all 13 wolfkin warriors stepped inside. Tom watched them move through his living room like they were clearing a hostile building, checking corners and doorways, their claws clicking softly against the hardwood floors. Their eyes took in everything, The old photographs on the walls, the worn furniture, the simple decorations that had accumulated over decades of living alone. Rachel was the first to truly relax, though relax was still a generous word for what she did. She lowered her weapon but kept it close. Her team followed her lead, settling into positions that were casual enough to look normal but positioned well enough that they could react to any threat in seconds. These warriors had trained together long enough that they didn't need to discuss strategy. They just moved like a single organism with 13 parts. Tom moved into the kitchen without making a big show of it. He didn't announce what he was doing or ask permission. He simply started working, running water to fill the coffee pot, pulling out the large soup pot he used for canning vegetables. Some of the hunters tensed at this, hands moving closer to weapons, but Rachel held up a hand. "Let him," she said quietly. The kitchen filled with familiar sounds, water boiling, the clink of bowls being set out, the smell of something warm and real cooking. Tom had learned long ago that food was a language that transcended almost everything. You could communicate things with a warm meal that words sometimes couldn't express. He made coffee first, the kind his late wife used to make. Strong and simple, no fancy additions. He set out cups and let people help themselves. Then he started the soup, a beef and vegetable recipe that had been passed down from his grandmother. Nothing fancy. Nothing that required ingredients he didn't have. Just honest food made with care. The hunters watched him with open suspicion. One of them, a younger wolfkin with white streaks in her dark fur, kept her hand on the hilt of her weapon the entire time. Tom pretended not to notice. He'd learned that sometimes people needed time to adjust to kindness. It wasn't something they encountered often, especially not from people they'd been taught to see as potential enemies. Rachel accepted a cup of coffee first. She sniffed it carefully, examining it like it might be poisoned. Tom understood. In her line of work, that was probably a reasonable concern. She took a sip and something almost like surprise crossed her scarred face. It was good coffee. Simple. Honest. Real. The other hunters began accepting cups, one by one. Some of them added nothing to it. Others found sugar or milk in the kitchen and made their choices. They were starting to settle into the strange normalcy of the moment. Warriors in a farmhouse kitchen, drinking coffee like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. When the soup was ready, Tom ladled it into bowls. He set them on the table with bread he'd baked 2 days ago. He didn't say anything about it. Didn't make a point of it. He just placed food in front of hungry people. Rachel watched him move about his kitchen. "Why?" she finally asked. It was a simple question, but there was weight behind it. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from us?" Tom paused. He leaned against the counter and looked at this scarred warrior with ancient eyes that had seen too much. "My wife used to say that kindness was the only thing worth doing," he said quietly. "She died 3 years ago. Cancer. Before she went, she made me promise I'd keep helping people. Keep treating everyone like they mattered. I told her I would." Rachel's scarred face showed nothing for a long moment. Tom didn't expect understanding. He'd learned that expecting things from others was usually a mistake. "We hunt criminals," Rachel said slowly. "We kill for money. We're not kind." "Maybe not," Tom said. He sat down at the table with them. "But you're people. You need food and shelter same as anyone else. Doesn't matter what your job is. Doesn't matter where you come from." Something shifted in Rachel's expression. It was subtle, just a softening around her eyes, a slight relaxation of muscles that had been tense since she arrived. She looked at her team, at the hunters who were eating his soup and drinking his coffee, and something in her seemed to settle. The younger wolfkin with the white streaks, her name was Jessica, Tom would learn later, took a spoonful of soup and closed her eyes. For a moment, she just existed in that experience. Warm food in a warm place, safe with her team, not worried about survival for the first time in months. "This is good," she said softly. "Thank you," Tom replied. The farmhouse fell into a strange peace. Outside, the solar storm raged and the sky burned crimson. But inside, 13 dangerous warriors and one old farmer shared a meal together. No one was asking for payment. No one was planning to exploit anyone else. For the first time in a very long time, these hunters felt something they rarely allowed themselves to feel. They felt safe. Tom was asleep in the chair by the kitchen window when it happened. He'd offered the hunters the bedrooms upstairs, but most of them had chosen to stay near Rachel in the living room. They were still wary, still not entirely sure they could trust this old human. Tom didn't mind. He'd settled into his favorite chair with a blanket, listening to the storm rage outside. The lightning strike was so bright and so violent that it woke him instantly. For a moment he thought the impact had hit the house. His heart jumped into his throat. Then he realized, the barn. The bolt had struck the barn and it had struck hard. He stumbled to the window and saw it immediately. The old wooden structure was already burning, flames climbing up the east wall toward the roof. The solar storm was still interfering with his ability to call for help. The nearest fire department was 15 miles away. Even if they could respond, they wouldn't make it in time. Tom was already moving toward the door when Rachel appeared beside him. She'd moved silently and fast. One moment she was somewhere in the living room, the next she was there, fully alert, taking in the situation with a warrior's practiced eye. "Barn's on fire," Tom said, stating the obvious because his mind wasn't working fast enough to do anything else. Rachel didn't hesitate. She turned and made a single sharp sound, a signal that was part growl, part howl, and instantly her team was moving. 13 Wolfkin warriors who'd been resting in his living room were suddenly a coordinated unit, already heading for the door. "We need water," Rachel said to Tom, not as a question but as a statement. She was already assessing the situation like a military commander. "How do we get water?" "Well," Tom said, his mind catching up now. "The storm knocked out the electric pump, but there's the hand pump by the back fence and the water trough for the animals. We can use those." Rachel nodded once and divided her team with hand signals. 2 hunters would work the hand pump. 3 would focus on keeping the fire from spreading to the house. The rest would try to save what they could from the barn and deal with the interior of the structure. Tom grabbed an old metal bucket from the porch and Rachel took it without comment. They moved toward the barn together and immediately the heat hit them. The fire had been burning for maybe 90 seconds, but it was already intense, the old dry wood burning like kindling. The hunters moved with a precision that took Tom's breath away. There was no panic. No confusion. No arguments about who should do what. They simply understood their roles and executed them. One of the younger hunters, a female with deep brown fur, was already on the roof, using a metal rake to push burning debris away from the house. Another was soaking the fence line with water from the trough, creating a barrier. Tom realized his prize horses were still inside. He'd forgotten about them in the shock of the moment. His 2 Arabians, animals he'd bred and trained for years, were trapped in the back stall. He made a move toward the barn door but Rachel grabbed his arm. "Wait," she commanded. Then she turned and made another signal. Jessica, the young hunter with the white streaks in her fur who'd enjoyed the soup so much, immediately understood. She took a deep breath, covered her face with a wet cloth she grabbed from the water trough, and ran straight into the burning barn. Tom's heart stopped. He wanted to go in after her. He was about to move when Rachel stopped him again with just a look. A look that said, "Trust her. She knows what she's doing." The seconds stretched into something that felt like forever. The barn was collapsing slowly, burning from the inside out. Smoke poured from every opening. Tom could hear the horses screaming. The sound was terrible and helpless and real. Then Jessica emerged. She was leading one of the horses by its halter, pulling the animal through the smoke. The horse was panicking, but Jessica moved with calm authority, speaking in low tones, keeping the animal moving forward. She got it 20 yards from the barn and secured it to a fence post. Without stopping, without waiting for anyone to thank her, Jessica turned and went back in. Tom felt something break open in his chest. This was a predator. This was a warrior trained to kill. And she was running into a burning building to save animals that didn't belong to her, that meant nothing to her except that they mattered to him. The second horse came out in Jessica's grip minutes later. The barn's roof was collapsing now, flames shooting toward the night sky. If Jessica had taken 30 more seconds, she would have been trapped inside. The hunters continued working as a unit, keeping the fire from spreading, protecting the rest of the structures. Tom found himself working alongside them, no longer thinking about the fact that they were alien warriors. They were just people doing what needed to be done. People who cared enough to risk themselves. It took 3 hours to bring the fire under control. By dawn, the barn was nothing but smoking rubble. But the house still stood. The other buildings were safe. And the horses were alive. Rachel stood beside Tom as the sun came up, both of them covered in ash and smoke. She looked at him, really looked at him, with eyes that had changed. Something fundamental had shifted in how she saw him. How she saw humans. She raised her right hand, the one with the most prominent claws, and pressed it against her heart. Then she extended it toward Tom, palm up. It was the Wolfkin gesture of respect. The gesture you gave to warriors. To equals. "I was wrong," Rachel said simply. "About your kind. About everything I was taught." Tom understood what that cost her to say. The radio crackled to life just after dawn. Tom was sitting on his porch with Rachel, both of them exhausted from the fire, when the transmission came through. It was staticky and broken, cutting in and out, but the message was clear enough. Hunter Unit 7, this is command. Solar interference is clearing. We have a location on target. Vessel went down approximately 2 miles northeast of your last known position. Repeat, criminal target has crash-landed in your operational zone. Rachel stood up immediately, her entire body shifting into that predatory alertness that Tom had seen her slip into before. She made a sound, that same signal she used to coordinate her team, and within seconds the other 12 hunters were on the porch, weapons checked, minds focused. This was what they did. This was what they were trained for. After days of being warriors without a purpose, they suddenly had a mission again. Tom watched them prepare, understanding what was about to happen. They would move out, track down this criminal, and engage in combat. It was their job. It was necessary. But something in Tom's mind was already working on a different angle. Wait, he said. Rachel paused. She turned to look at him with an expression that suggested she didn't appreciate being stopped when she had a target to pursue. But she did stop. That was something Tom had earned over the past few days, the right to be heard. What is it? Rachel asked. Tom stood up slowly, thinking through the idea forming in his head. This criminal, how dangerous is he? Very, one of the other hunters answered. Her name was Catherine, and she had a scar across her left eye that made her look perpetually angry. Armed. Desperate. He's killed 3 of our agents in the past year. Right, Tom said. He was thinking out loud now, working through the problem like he would a farm problem. So if you go after him directly, there's going to be a fight. Someone could get hurt. Maybe one of you. Maybe him. Either way, blood gets spilled. Rachel was watching him intently. That's how hunters work. We find the target. We engage. We capture or eliminate. I know, Tom said. But what if we did it differently? He walked to the edge of the porch and pointed toward the barn, or what was left of it. That criminal, he's stranded just like you were. His ship is probably damaged. He's probably scared. What does a scared, stranded person do? Jessica stepped forward. She was beginning to understand how Tom's mind worked. He looks for shelter. Exactly, Tom said. He turned back to Rachel. He doesn't know this is your territory. He doesn't know you're here. When his instruments come back online, or when he gets enough of his systems working, he's going to scan the area. And what's he going to find? Rachel's scarred face showed the faintest hint of understanding. A farmhouse. A farmhouse, Tom repeated. Shelter. Water. Possibly supplies. To a desperate person, that looks like salvation. He'll come here. He'll knock on the door looking for help. And you'll be waiting. The hunters looked at each other. This wasn't how they operated. Their training emphasized direct engagement, overwhelming force, military tactics. The idea of using a civilian structure, and a civilian, as bait went against everything they'd been taught. But Rachel was considering it. Tom could see her mind working, evaluating the tactical advantages. You'd be putting your home at risk, she said finally. If something goes wrong, if he's more dangerous than we expect. I know, Tom interrupted. But I'd rather do this way than have one of you get hurt. Besides, he added, and he meant this sincerely, I trust you. I think you can handle this. There was a long silence. Then Rachel nodded once. We'll do it your way. The hunters spent the next several hours setting up. They didn't use fancy technology. Most of their equipment was still being repaired from the crash anyway. Instead, they used intelligence and positioning. Catherine and 2 others took positions in the barn's remaining structures, hidden but with clear sight lines to the farmhouse entrance. Jessica and 2 more hunters positioned themselves inside the house, out of sight but ready to move fast. Rachel stayed in the kitchen with Tom, visible through the window, maintaining the appearance that the farmhouse was simply occupied. Tom made coffee. He cut bread. He did ordinary things that would appear normal to someone looking in from outside. Rachel sat across from him at the table, her weapon concealed but within arm's reach. The waiting was harder than the action. Hours passed. Tom kept expecting something and nothing happened. Then late in the afternoon they saw him. The criminal emerged from the tree line about a quarter-mile away, moving cautiously toward the farmhouse. He was humanoid but not human. His skin had a grayish tint, and his movements were wrong somehow, jointed in places that suggested an alien physiology. He was armed, a weapon visible at his hip, but he moved like someone who was trying to appear non-threatening. Tom felt his heart rate spike. This was real now. This wasn't a plan or a theory. This was actually happening. The criminal approached the farmhouse slowly, carefully. He was clearly alert to danger but also clearly desperate. When he reached the door, he knocked. 3 sharp raps. Tom got up to answer it. "Don't open it," Rachel said quietly. "Let him think you're cautious." Tom knocked back. "Who's there?" "I need shelter," the criminal called out. His voice was rough, accented in a way Tom couldn't place. "My ship crashed. My communications are down. I need help." Tom opened the door a crack, keeping the chain lock engaged. "How many are you?" "Just me," the criminal said. "Please, I'm injured. I need." That's when Rachel stood up, visible through the window behind Tom. The criminal's entire body went rigid. He recognized her. His hand went for his weapon, but before he could move more than an inch, hunters emerged from 3 different positions simultaneously. From the barn. From the side of the house. From the windows. The criminal was surrounded in seconds. Catherine had a weapon trained on him from the barn window. Jessica and another hunter blocked his escape route. Rachel stepped out onto the porch, her claws extended. The criminal didn't fight. He raised his hands slowly, understanding that resistance was pointless. "On the ground," Rachel commanded. "Hands behind your head. Don't move." The criminal complied. Within 30 seconds he was restrained. No shots fired. No blood spilled. No hunters injured. Tom watched from inside the farmhouse as his farm became the scene of perfect cooperation between species. The hunters moved around the captured criminal with the precision of a team that had learned to work together. They communicated with quick signals and quiet voices. They protected each other while securing their target. Rachel approached Tom afterward, and there was something different in her expression. Respect. But also something more, recognition that Tom had given them something valuable. Not just a successful capture but a new way of thinking about how to solve problems. "You think like a warrior," she said simply. "But with wisdom. That's rare." 3 days passed. The solar storm gradually weakened, its crimson grip on the sky loosening with each passing hour. Tom's farm had become a strange kind of hub, a place where hunters worked alongside a farmer, where alien warriors helped repair fences and tend to animals, where 2 completely different worlds had somehow found common ground. The hunter's ship was finally operational again. The engineers among Rachel's team had worked tirelessly, using parts salvaged from their original supplies and materials Tom had on hand. It was a patchwork repair job, but it would hold. By the afternoon of the 3rd day, the ship hummed to life, ready to fly. Tom stood in his farmyard watching the final preparations. The criminal they'd captured was already secured in the ship's detention area. The hunters' equipment was packed. Their mission was complete. They could leave now. They should leave. They had jobs waiting across the galaxy, reports to file, superiors to answer to. But something felt incomplete. Rachel approached Tom as the sun began to set. She moved with a different kind of grace now, not the predatory stalking of a warrior but something softer. Something that suggested friendship. Behind her came Jessica and Catherine and all the others. 13 hunters who'd arrived as strangers and were leaving as something different. Rachel stopped a few feet away from Tom. Then, slowly and deliberately, she knelt. Not sat down. Actually knelt, dropping to one knee in a gesture that was clearly significant. The other hunters followed her lead, all 13 of them, kneeling in Tom's farmyard like they were in some kind of sacred space. Tom didn't know what to do. He stood there, an old farmer in work clothes, facing 13 alien warriors on their knees. "In the history of Wolfkin culture," Rachel said, her voice carrying a weight that suggested ceremony, "we kneel only to those we recognize as our equals or our superiors. We kneel to acknowledge something greater than ourselves. I kneel to you, Tom, because you have shown us something we thought was lost in this galaxy." She paused, and Tom could see emotion in her scarred face. Genuine emotion. "You showed us that there are still beings who choose kindness when they could choose indifference. You showed us that humans are not what we were taught. You showed us that your kind has a strength we didn't understand." The other hunters remained silent, but their posture suggested agreement. These were warriors, trained killers, and they were kneeling to an old farmer who'd simply offered them shelter and soup. "I don't know what to say," Tom admitted quietly. "You don't have to say anything," Rachel replied. She stood up, and the others stood with her. "But I need to give you something. Not because you asked for it. Not because you expect it. But because it's right." She pulled out a piece of paper, actual paper, which Tom found oddly touching in a world of digital communication. It was a contract of some kind, written in English. Tom began reading it. The document was formal and official, stamped with symbols he didn't recognize. It stated, in clear language, that the Wolfkin Hunter Unit 7, under the command of Rachel, would provide protection and supplies to Tom and his farm for the rest of his life. Any threat to his property or his person would be met with the full force of their organization. It was more than a promise. It was a legal binding. "You're making me a protected client?" Tom asked, not quite believing what he was reading. "More than that," Rachel said. She pulled out another document. "This is an open invitation. You can call on us at any time. If you're in danger, if you need help, if you simply want to travel the stars and see what's out there, we will come. No question. No hesitation. You saved our lives by offering us shelter. This is our way of honoring that debt." Jessica stepped forward and handed Tom something else, a small device about the size of a phone. "Communication unit," she explained. "Works across any distance. You press this button and it connects directly to our ship. Anywhere we are in the galaxy, we'll hear you." Tom held the device in his weathered hands, feeling the weight of what it represented. A bridge. A connection that would stretch across the stars themselves. "There's one more thing," Rachel said. She activated a holographic display on her wrist. "I'm sending a full report to the Wolfkin government. A detailed account of everything that happened here. Your kindness. Your tactical thinking. Your willingness to help beings you've been taught to fear. I'm submitting it as an official incident report, which means it will be archived. Other hunters will read it. Other military commanders will read it. Other governments will read it." She looked directly into Tom's eyes. "You're going to change how we see your species. Not just because of what you did, but because you did it without asking for anything in return. That's rare. That's valuable. That's worth recording." The sun was fully setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The ship's engines began to hum louder, preparing for departure. "We should go," Rachel said. "But we won't forget this. None of us will." The hunters filed into their ship one by one. Catherine was the last to leave and she paused at the entrance. She looked back at Tom and raised her hand, that same gesture of respect she'd learned from watching Rachel. Tom raised his hand in return. Then the ship sealed. Tom watched as it lifted off the ground, slowly at first, then faster and faster. It climbed through the evening sky, its engines creating a sound like distant thunder. Within seconds it was gone, leaving only the fading light of its passage against the darkening stars. Tom stood alone in his farmyard, holding the communication device in one hand and the contract in the other. His farm looked the same as it always had, the house, the fences, the fields stretching out into darkness. But everything had changed. He had changed. He thought about Rachel kneeling in his yard. He thought about Jessica running into a burning barn to save animals that didn't belong to her. He thought about 13 warriors who'd learned that compassion was a strength, not a weakness. Somewhere across the galaxy a report was being filed. A report about an old farmer and 13 wolfkin hunters. A report that would be read by government officials and military strategists and regular people who'd never thought about humans being anything other than what they'd been told. That report was going to plant seeds. Seeds of understanding. Seeds of the possibility that beings from different worlds could work together. That they could trust each other. That they could see past fear and prejudice to something deeper. Tom looked up at the stars, knowing that somewhere out there Rachel was looking down at Earth and remembering the taste of his coffee and the warmth of his farmhouse. He smiled. Then he walked back inside his farmhouse, thinking about how to tell this story to anyone who would listen. Because that's what humans did best, he realized. They told stories. They shared experiences. They planted seeds of understanding wherever they went. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real strength of humanity all along.